Okay, hello ladies and gentlemen, Forrest Wallman here, and welcome back to another reading live stream. Tonight, I will be reading chapters 4 and 5 of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Um, it actually has been almost a month since I last read this book. But, to put it simply, Bilbo Baggins, this is basically the continuation of the start Bilbo Baggins' adventure with the fellow elves and the wizard that is Gandalf, amongst other things. We're going to be introduced to a character that I will say is a very interesting character for me to try to be, which is kind of interesting to put to say the very least of it. Particularly the fact that this character is well known because of the fact that of how he says my precious. Yes, we're being introduced to Golem here. And the thing about Golem is, for me, it's like, I have to try to get into my inner voice because if you guys don't know, I did some voices trying, trying to be director, like the one guy that's in the Hobbit clique. That's kind of perfect, you know. I gotta try to make him sound like this. But then you also have exactly what he does. By the way, like there are gonna be times where he'll be moving his tongue out like. But yeah, that's how it. But yeah, I've had to try to do that. So my best bet was to listen to how his character is and try to mimic that in the movies. But then I thought, well, it's kind of hard kind of doing that. So I went toward another interesting turn with that by listening to Dubus Goobus and that one video that involved him basically talking about a particular Lord of the Rings video game that nobody ever really talks about anymore, unless it's like the running joke of something or another. But yes, you probably know the one. The one that came out some years ago that nobody really talks about anymore because of how ridiculously bad it has been said to be, compared to most of the games of that year. Hell, I think it was actually the worst game of that year, if not easily one of the worst ones for that year. Um, but yeah, Golem. So I have to try to do a voice for him, and it's gonna be kind of tricky, but I think I can do it. But that's for when we get to him. Let's get started with the book, shall we? Chapter 4, Overhill and Underhill. Also, I want to say real quick before I do read, if anybody says anything and I don't see it right off the bat, please take note that it's because I am reading the book. I'm not ignoring anybody willingly. I am just reading the book. But but then when you got moments like this where there's like a space in between the paragraphs, then those will be like the stopping points, and I'll look at chat then. But until then, please do not think I'm ignoring anybody because I don't want. That I try not to. Hello, Daniel Barry. How you doing tonight? All right. Chapter 4: Overhill and Underhill. There were many paths that led into those mountains, and many passes over them. But most of the paths were cheats and deceptions and led nowhere or to bad ends, and most of the passes were infested by evil things and dreadful dangers. The dwarves and the hobbit, helped by the wise advice of Elrond and the knowledge and memory of Gandalf, took the right road to the right pass. Long days after they had climbed out of the valley and left the last homely house miles behind, they were still going up and up and up. It was a hard path and a dangerous path, a crooked way and a lonely and a long. Now they could look back over the lands they had left, laid out behind them far below, far, far away in the west, where things were blue and faint. Bilbo knew there lay his own country of safe and comfortable things, in his little hobbit hole. He shivered. It was getting bitter cold up here, and the wind came shrill among the rocks. Boulders, too, at times, came galloping down the mountainsides, let loose by midday sun upon the snow, and passed among them, which was lucky, or over their heads, which was alarming. The nights were comfortless and chill, and they did not dare to sing or talk too loud, for the echoes were uncanny, and the silence seemed to dislike being broken, except by the noise of water and the wail of wind and the crack of stone. The summer is getting on down below, thought Bilbo, and haymaking is going on and picnics. They will be harvesting and blackberrying before we even begin to go down the other side at this rate. And the others were thinking equally gloomy thoughts, although when they had said good-bye to Elrond in the high hope of a midsummer morning, they had spoken gaily of the passage of the mountains, and of riding swift across the lands beyond. Gotta say it again, because I know how some people be like. Some random people be trying to say something that it isn't. In this situation, saying as it put it here, spoken gaily of the passage of the mountains, it means they're speaking happily about it, not what it what the word modern day what the modern day definition of that word is. Moving on. They had thought of coming to the secret door in the lonely mountain, perhaps that very next last moon of autumn, and perhaps it would be Durin's day, they had said. Only Gandalf had shaken his head and said nothing. Dwarves had not passed that way for many years, but Gandalf had, and he knew how evil and danger had grown and thriven in the wild, since the dragons had driven men from the lands, and the goblins had spread in secret after the battle of the millions of Moria. Even the good, even the good, even the good plans of wise wizards like Gandalf and of good friends like Elrond go astray sometimes when you are off on dangerous adventures over the edge of the wild, and Gandalf was a wise enough wizard to know it. He knew that something unexpected might happen, and he hardly dared to hope that they would pass without fearful adventure over those great tall mountains with lonely peaks and valleys where no king ruled. They did not. All was well until one day they met a thunderstorm. More than a thunderstorm, a thunder battle. You know how terrific a really big thunderstorm can be down in the land and in a river valley, especially at times when two great thunderstorms meet and clash. More terrible still are thunder and lightning in the mountains at night, when storms come up from east and west and make war. The lightning splinters on the peaks, and rocks shiver, and great crashes split the air and go rolling and tumbling into every cave and hollow, and the darkness is filled with overwhelming noise and sudden light. Bilbo had never seen or imagined anything of the kind. They were high up in a narrow place, with a dreadful fall into a dim valley at one side of them. There they were, sheltering under a hanging rock for the night, and he lay beneath a blanket and shook from head to toe. When he peeped out in the lightning flashes, he saw that across the valley the stone giants were out and were hurling rocks at one another for a game, and catching them and tossing them down into the darkness, where they smashed among the trees far below, or splintered into little bits with a bang. Then came a wind and a rain, and the wind whipped the rain and the hail about in every direction, so that an overhanging rock was no protection at all. Soon they were getting drenched, and their ponies were standing with their heads down and their tails between their legs, and some of them were whinnying with fright. They could hear the giants guffawing and shouting all over the mountainsides. This won't do at all, said Thorin. If we don't get blown off or drowned or struck by lightning, we shall be picked up by some giant and kicked sky high for a football. Well, if you know of anywhere better, take us there, said Gandalf, who was feeling very grumpy and was far from happy about the giants himself. The end of their argument was that they sent Filey and Kylie to look for a better shelter. They had very sharp eyes, and being the youngest of the dwarves by some 50 years, they usually got these sorts of jobs, when everybody could see that it was of absolutely no use sending Bilbo. There's nothing like looking, if you want to find something, or so Thorin said to the young dwarves. You certainly usually find something if you look, but it's not always quite the something you were after. So it proved on this occasion. Soon Filey and Kylie came crawling back, holding on to the rocks in the wind. We have found a dry cave, they said. Not far round the next corner, and ponies and all could get inside. Have you thoroughly explored it? Said the wizard, who knew that caves up in the mountains were seldom unoccupied. Yes, yes, they said, though everybody knew they could have been long about it. They had come back too quickly. It isn't all that big, and it does not go far back. That, of course, is the dangerous part about caves. You don't know how far they go back, sometimes, or where a passage behind may lead to, or what is waiting for you inside. But now Filey and Kylie's news seemed good enough, so they all got up and prepared to move. The wind was howling and the thunder still growling, and they had a business getting themselves and their ponies along. Still, it was not very far to go, and long they came to a big rock standing out in the path. If you stepped behind, you found a low arch in the side of the mountain. There was just room to get the ponies through with a squeeze when they had been unpacked and unsaddled. As they passed under the arch, it was good to hear the wind and the rain outside instead of all about them, and to feel safe from the giants and their rocks. But the wizard was taking no risks. He lit up his wand, as he did that day in Bilbo's dining room that seemed so long ago, if you remember, and by its light they explored the cave from end to end. It seemed quite a fair size, but not too large and mysterious. It had a dry floor and some comfortable nooks. At one end there was room for the ponies, and there they stood, mighty glad of the change, steam, steaming and champing in their nose bags. Oin and Gloin wanted to light a fire as the door to dry their clothes, but Gandalf would not hear of it. So they spread out their wet things on the floor and got dry ones out of their bundles. Then they made their blankets comfortable, got out their pipes and blew smoke rings, which Gandalf turned into different colors and set dancing up by the roof to amuse them. They talked and forgot about the storm, and discussed what each would do with his share of the treasure when they got it, which at the moment did not seem so impossible. And so they dropped off to sleep one by one, and that was the last time that they used the ponies, packages, baggages, tools, and paraphernalia that they had brought with them. It turned out a good thing that night that they had brought little Bilbo with them after all, for, somehow, he could not go to sleep for a long while, and when he did sleep, he had a very nasty dreams. He dreamed that a crack in the wall at the back of the cave got bigger and bigger, and opened wider and wider, and he was very afraid, but could not call out or do anything but lie and look. Then he dreamed that the floor of the cave was giving way, and he was slipping, beginning to fall down. Goodness knows where to. And at that he woke up with a horrible start, and found that part of his dream was true. A crack had opened at the back of the cave, and was already a wide passage. He was just in time to see the last of the pony's tails disappearing into it. Of course he gave a very loud a yell as a hobbit can give, which is surprising for their size. Out jumped the goblins. Big goblins. Big, great, ugly-looking goblins. Lots of goblins. Before you could say rocks and blocks. There were 6 to each dwarf at least, and 2 even for Bilbo, and they were all grabbed and carried through the crack, before you could say tinder and flint. But not Gandalf. Bilbo's yell had done that much good. It had wakened him up wide in a splintered second, and when goblins came to grab him, there was a terrific flash like lightning in the cave, a smell like gunpowder, and several of them fell dead. The crack closed with a snap, and Bilbo and the dwarves were on the wrong side of it. Where was Gandalf? Of that neither they nor the goblins had any idea, and the goblins did not wait to find out. They seized Bilbo and the dwarves and hurried them along. It was deep, deep, dark, such as only goblins that have taken to living in the heart of the mountains can see through. The passages there were crossed and tangled in all directions, but the goblins knew their way, as well as you do to the nearest post office, and the way went down, and it was most horribly stuffy. The goblins were very rough and pinched unmercifully, and chuckled and laughed in their horrible stony voices. And Bilbo was more unhappy than even then when the troll had picked him up by his toes. He wished again and again for his nice bright hobbit hole, not for the last time. Now there came a glimmer of a red light before them. The goblins began to sing or croak, keeping time with the flap of their flat feet on the stone, and shaking their prisoners as well. Alright, let me take a look at this real quick before I do this. Hmm. This will be very interesting trying to do a song for. I basically gotta go acapella for this shit. I really gotta go acapella for this. Hold on. Snap, clap, snap, the black crack. Rip, grab, pinch, nab. And down to Goblin Town. You go, my lad. Clash, crash, crush, smash. Hammer and tongs, knocker and thongs. Pound, pound, far underground. Ho, ho, my lad. Swish, smack, whip, crack. Batter and beat, yammer and bleat. Work, work, nor dare to shirk. While goblins clap and goblins laugh. Round and round, far underground, below, my lad. That's the best I can do, don't at me. It sounded truly terrifying. The walls echoed to the clap snap and the crush smash and to the ugly laughter there, ho ho, my lad. The general meaning of the song was only too plain, for now the goblins took out whips and whipped them with a swish, smack, and set them running as fast as they could in front of them. And more than one of the dwarves were already yammering and bleeding like anything when they stumbled into a big cavern. It was lit by a great red fire in the middle and by torches along the walls, and it was full of goblins. They all laughed and stamped and clapped their hands when the dwarves, with poor little Bilbo at the back and nearest to the whips, came running in, while the goblin drivers whooped and cracked their whips behind. The ponies were already there huddled in a corner, and there were all, the baggages and packages lying broken open and being rummaged by goblins, and smelt by goblins, and fingered by goblins, and quarreled over by goblins. I'm afraid that was the last they ever saw of those excellent little ponies, including a jolly, sturdy little white fellow that Elrond had lent to Gandalf, since his horse was not suitable for the mountain paths. For goblins eat horses and ponies and donkeys, and other much more dreadful things, and they are always hungry. Just now, however, the prisoners were thinking only of themselves. The goblins chained their hands behind their backs and linked them all together in a line, and dragged them to the far end of the cavern with little Bilbo tugging at the end of the row. There in the shadows, on a large flat stone, sat a tremendous goblin with a huge head, and armed goblins were standing round him, carrying the axes and the bent swords that they use. Now goblins are cruel, wicked, and bad-hearted. They make no beautiful things, but they make many clever ones. They can tunnel and mine as well as any, but the most skilled dwarves, when they take the trouble, though they are usually untidy and dirty. Hammers, axes, swords, daggers, pickaxes, tongs, and also instruments of torture, they make very well, or get other people to make to their design. Prisoners and slaves that have to work till they die, for want of air and light. It is not unlikely that they invented some of the machines that have since troubled the world, especially the ingenious devices for killing large numbers of people at once, for wheels and engines and explosions always delighted them, and also not working with their own hands more than they could help. But in those days, in those wild parts, they had not advanced, as it is called, so far. They did not hate dwarves especially, no more than they hated everybody and everything, and particularly the orderly and prosperous. In some parts, wicked dwarves had even made alliances with them, but they had a special grudge against Thorin's people because of the war which you have heard mentioned, but which does not come into this tale. And anyways, goblins don't care who they catch, as long as it is done smart and secret, and the prisoners are not able to defend themselves. Who are these miserable persons? Said the great goblin. Dwarves in this, said one of the drivers, pulling at Bilbo's chain so that he fell forward onto his knees. We found them sheltering in our front porch. What do you mean? What do you mean by it? Said the great goblin, turning to Thorin. Up to no good, I'll warrant. Spying on the private business of my people, I guess. Thieves, I shouldn't be surprised to learn. Murderers and friends of elves not unlikely. Come, what have you got to say? Thorin the dwarf at your service, he replied. It was merely a polite nothing. Of the things which you suspect and imagine we had no idea at all. We sheltered from a storm in what seemed a convenient cave and unused. Nothing was further from our thoughts than inconveniencing goblins in any way whatsoever. That was true enough. That was true enough. Said the great goblin. So you say. Might I ask what you are doing up in the mountains at all, and where you are coming from, and where you are going to? In fact, I should like to know all about you. Not that it would do you much good, Thorin Oakenshield. I know too much about your folk already. But let's have the truth, or I will prepare something particularly uncomfortable for you. We were on a journey to visit our relatives and our nephews and nieces and first, second, and third cousins, and the other descendants of our grandfathers, who live on the east side of these truly hospitable mountains, said Thorin, not quite knowing what to say all at once in a moment, when obviously the exact truth would not do at all. He is a liar, oh truly tremendous one, said one of the drivers. Several of our people were struck by lightning in the cave when we invited these creatures to come below, and they are as dead as stones. Also, he has not explained this. He held out the sword which Thorin had worn, the sword which came from the troll's lair. The great goblin gave a truly awful howl of rage when he looked at it, and all his soldiers gnashed their teeth, clashed their shields, and stamped. They knew the sword at once. It had killed hundreds of goblins in its time, when the fair elves of Gondolin hunted them in the hills or did battle before their walls. They had called it Utrist, Goblin Cleaver, but the goblins called it simply Biter. They hated it and hated worse anyone that carried it. Murderers and elf friends! The great goblin shouted. Slash them! Beat them! Bite them! Gnash them! Take them away to dark holes full of snakes and never let them see the light again! He was in such a rage that he jumped off his seat and himself rushed at Thorin with his mouth open. Just at that moment, all the lights in the cavern went out, and the great fire went off, poof, into a tower of blue glowing smoke right up to the roof that scattered piercing white sparks all among the goblins. The yells and yammering, croaking, gibbering and jabbering, howls, growls and curses, shrieking and skirting, that followed were beyond description. Several hundred wild cats and wolves bearing roasted snowy alive together would not have compared with it. The sparks were burning holes in the goblins, and the smoke that now fell from the roof made the air too thick for even their eyes to see through. Soon they were falling over one another and rolling in heaps on the floor, biting and kicking and fighting as if they had all gone mad. Suddenly a sword flashed in its own light. Bilbo saw it go right through the great goblin as he stood dumbfounded in the middle of his rage. He fell dead, and the goblin soldiers fled before the sword shrieked into the darkness. The sword went back into its sheath. Follow, follow me, quick, said a voice fierce and quiet. Before Bilbo understood what had happened, he was trotting along again, as fast as he could trot, at the end of the line, down more dark passages, with the yells of the goblin hall growing fainter behind him. A pale light was leading them on. Quicker, quicker, said the voice. The torches will soon be relit. Half a minute, said Dory, who was at the back next to Bilbo, and a decent fellow. He made the hobbit scramble on his shoulders as best he could with his tied hands, and then off they all went at a run, with a clink clink of chains and many a stumble, since they had no hands to steady themselves with. Not for a long while did they stop, and by that time they must have been right down in the very mountain's heart. Then Gandalf lit up his wand. Of course it was Gandalf, but just then they were too busy to ask how he got there. He took out his sword again, and again it flashed in the dark by itself. It burned with a rage that made it gleam if goblins were about. Now it was bright as blue flame, for delight in the killing of the great lord of the cave. It made no trouble whatever of cutting through the goblin chains and setting all the prisoners free as quickly as possible. This sword's name was Glamdring, the foe hammer, if you remember. The goblins just called it Beater, and hated it worse than Biter, if possible. Orchrus, too, had been saved, for Gandalf had brought it along as well, snatching it from one of the terrified guards. Gandalf thought of most things and thought he could not do everything. He could do a great deal for friends in a tight corner. Are you all here? Said he, handing his sword back to Thorin with a bow. Let me see. One, that's Thorin. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Where are Filey and Kylie? Here they are. 12, 13, and here's Mr. Baggins. 14. Well, well, it might be worse, and then again it might be a good deal better. No ponies and no food, and no knowing quite where we are, and hordes of angry goblins just behind. On we go! On they went. Gandalf was quite right. They began to hear goblin noises and horrible cries far behind in the passages they had come through. That sent them on faster than ever, and as poor Bilbo could not possibly go half as fast, the dwarves to roll along at a tremendous pace, I can tell you, when they have to, they took it in turn to carry him on their backs. Still, goblins go faster than dwarves, and these goblins knew their way better. They had made the path themselves, and were madly angry. So that do so so that do what they could. The dwarves heard the cries and howls getting closer and closer. Soon they could hear even the flap of the goblin feet, many, many feet which seemed only to just round the last corner. The blink of red torches could be seen behind them in the tunnel, and they were following, and they were getting deadly tired. Why, oh, why did I ever leave my hobbit hole? Said poor Mr. Baggins, burning up and down on Bomber's back. Why, oh, why did I ever bring a wretched little hobbit on a treasure hunt? Said poor Bomber, who was fat and staggered along with the sweat dripping down his nose in his heat and terror. At this point, Gandalf fell behind and Thorin with him. They turned a sharp corner. About turn, he shouted. Draw your sword, Thorin! There was nothing else to be done, and the goblins did not like it. They came scurrying round the corner in full cry, and found Goblin Cleaver and Foehammer shining cold and bright right in their astonished eyes. The ones in front dropped their torches and gave one yell before they were killed. The ones behind yelled still more, and leaped back, knocking over those that were running after them. Bitter and Peter! They shrieked, and soon they were all in confusion, and most of them were hustling back the way they had come. It was quite a long while before any of them dared to turn that corner. By that time the dwarfs had gone on again, a long, long way into the dark tunnels of the goblins' realm. When the goblins discovered that, they put out their torches and they slipped on soft shoes, and they chose out their very quickest runners with the sharpest ears and eyes. These ran forward, as swift as weasels in the dark, and with hardly any more noise than bats. That is why neither Bilbo nor the dwarves, nor even Gandalf heard them coming, nor did they see them, but they were seen by the goblins that ran silently up behind, for Gandalf was letting his wand give out a faint light to help the dwarves as they went along. Quite suddenly, Dory, now at the back of them carrying Bilbo, was grabbed from behind in the dark. He shouted and fell, and the hobbit rolled off his shoulders into the blackness, bumped his head on hard rock, and remembered nothing more. Alright, so I'm gonna take this quick break to do some do something real quick. I will be Okay, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, everybody. I have returned. Let's see here. Somebody said I should read the Bible. This right here that I got my hand on, that is the Bible. A friend of mine who uh, who uh, follows in this particular religion did gift this to me a number of years ago. I still have it because I respect the hell out of it. Well, I can't really say that for obvious reasons, but you know what? I respect this man so much. I should say that this book is still in my possession. That's not the only Bible I have. I also have a New Testament, but it's like one of those big, large print kind of Bibles. But yeah, so it's right there, but it's gonna be a while. I can easily tell you that right now. Let's see. Then we got Funny Man Gaming. How you doing tonight? If you're still here. But yeah, so and I have gone on record to say, with the exception of a few books that I will probably do under I will do in a certain way because there's one book that I know that will be very much not kid friendly. So I'll probably either do that as a linked playlist for anybody that wants to see that kind of thing. I also have a book that's from a person that has since been out of the spotlight because of things that they were accused of doing. But I'm probably not going to read that book because of that very reason whatsoever. And there's maybe like one or two of the books that I can think of that could fall into that sort of category, but not exactly. Like, because like right now, I do have all seven of the Harry Potter books, and I was thinking of reading at least the first one. But then J.K. Rowling said some questionable. Uh, oh yeah, yeah, I get that. But yeah, I have had the Harry Potter books for so long, and I was gonna read the first one until the author decided to be controversial. And so, regardless of where I personally stand on that, I knew if I were to read that, people would try to spin it in a certain way. So I'm gonna wait until the author in question doesn't say very many questionable things after a certain amount of time has passed before I go back to reading the first book, out of respect to those that were personally and that felt very, very upset, and understandably so, at some of her comments from about a month or two ago. So there's that. Um, but yeah, as soon as I feel like it'd be good enough to try to read those books, I'll see about it. But for now, I'm good with what I'm reading right now. I'm either reading Night Shift by Stephen King and The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, so there's that. Yeah, just here because I have nothing better to do. Also, that I thought might as well hear you read kind of like a. Yeah, I get it. I get it. And that's sort of the whole point of this is to kind of be like a storybook reader. Because and some people have actually pointed out the best thing to do because like I would like to try to be like a voice like a voice actor, even though my voice probably would be suitable for something like somebody that needs a Patrick Star voice actor, because I have been told under no uncertain terms that I sound very much like Patrick Star so many times that it's not even funny. um, and basically, whatever other kind of story, any other kind of characters that have like a deep voice to them, like mine, I probably would do very well with them. But I try to be good with other characters. Just depends on who we're talking about. But all right, question: Is anybody here ready to be introduced to a new character? Because we're about to be introduced to a new character in chapter 5. I won't say who, even though I kind of did hint toward it at the beginning of the stream. If you were there, you might know who I'm talking about. If not, well, you're about to find out. Alright, let's do this. Chapter 5, Riddles in the Dark. When Bilbo opened his eyes, he wondered if he had, for it was just as dark as with them shut. No one was anywhere near him. Just imagine his fright. He could hear nothing, see nothing, and he could feel nothing except the stone of the floor. Very slowly he got up and groped about on all fours, till he touched the wall of the tunnel. But neither up nor down it could he find anything. Nothing at all. No sign of goblins, no sign of dwarves. His head was swimming, and he was far from certain even of the direction they had been going in when he had his fall. He guessed as well as he could, and crawled along for a good way, until suddenly his hand met what felt like a tiny ring of cold metal lying on the floor of the tunnel. It was a turning point in his career, but he did not know it. He put the ring in his pocket almost without thinking. Certainly, it did not seem of any particular use at the moment. He did not go much further, but sat down on the cold floor and gave himself up to complete miserableness for a long while. He thought of himself frying bacon and eggs in his own kitchen at home, for he could feel inside that it was high time for some meal or other, but that only made him miserabler. He could not think of what to do, nor could he think what had happened, or why he had been left behind, or why, if he had been left behind, the goblins had not caught him, or even why his head was so sore. The truth was he had been lying quiet, out of sight and out of mind, in a very dark corner for a long while. After some time he felt for his pipe. It was not broken, and that was something. Then he felt for his pouch, and there was some tobacco in it, and that was something more. Then he felt for matches, and he could not find any at all, and that shattered his hopes completely. Just as well for him as he agreed when he came to his senses. Goodness knows what the striking of matches and the smell of tobacco would have brought on him out of dark holes in that horrible place. Still, at the moment he felt very crushed. But in slapping all his pockets and feeling all round himself for matches, his hand came on the hilt of his little sword, the little dagger that he got from the trolls, and that he had quite forgotten. Not fortunately had the goblins noticed it, as he wore it inside his breeches. Now he drew it out. It shone pale and dim before his eyes. So it is an elvish blade too, he thought, and goblins are not very near, and yet not far enough. But somehow he was comforted. It was rather splendid to be wearing a blade, made in Gondolin for the goblin wars of which so many songs have sung, and also he had noticed that such weapons made a great impression on goblins that came upon them suddenly. Go back, he thought. No good at all. Go sideways? Impossible. Go forward? Only thing to do. On we go. So up he got and trod along with his little sword held in front of him, and one hand feeling the wall, and his heart, all of it, a pat, a patter and a pitter. Now certainly Bilbo was in what is called a tight place. But you must remember it was not quite so tight for him as it would have been for me or you. Hobbits are not quite like ordinary people, and after all, if their holes are nice, cheery places and properly aired, quite different from the tunnels of the goblins, still they are more used to tunneling than we are, and they do not easily lose their sense of direction underground, not when their heads have recovered from being bumped. Also, they can move very quietly and hide easily, and recover wonderfully from falls and bruises. And they have a fund of wisdom and wise sayings that men have mostly never heard or have forgotten long ago. I should not have liked to have been in Mr. Baggins's place all the same. The tunnel seemed to have no end. All he knew was that it was still going down pretty steadily, and keeping in the same direction in spite of a twist and a turn or two. There were passages leading off to the side even every now and then, as he knew by the glimmer of his sword, or could feel with his hand on the wall. Of these he took no notice, except to hurry past for fear of goblins or half-imagined dark things coming out of them. On he went, and down, and still he heard no sound of anything except the occasional whir of a bat by his ears, which startled him at first, till it became too frequent to bother about. I do not know how long he kept on like this, but hating to go on, not daring to stop, on, until he was tireder than tired. It seemed like all the way to tomorrow and over it to the days beyond. Suddenly, without warning, he trotted splash in the water. Ah, it was icy cold. That pulled him into sharp and short. He did not know whether it was just a pool in the path, or the edge of an underground stream that crossed the passage, or the brink of a deep, dark, subterranean lake. The sword was hardly shining at all. He stopped and he could hear, when he listened hard, drip drops, drip, drip, dripping from an unseen roof into the water below. But there seemed no other sort of sound. So it is a pool or a lake, and not an underground river, he thought. Still he did not dare to wade out into the darkness. He could not swim, and he thought, too, of nasty, slimy things, with big, bulging, blind eyes, wriggling in the water. There are strange things living in the pools and lakes in the hearts of mountains. Fish whose feathers swam in, goodness only knows how many years ago, and never swam out again, while their eyes grew bigger and bigger and bigger from trying to see in the blackness. Also, there are other things more slimy than fish. Even in the tunnels and caves the goblins have made for themselves, there are other things living unbeknown to them, that have sneaked in from outside to lie up in the dark. Some of these caves, too, go back in their beginnings to ages before the goblins, who, with, who only widened them and joined them with the passages, and the original owners are still there in odd corners, slinking and nosing about. Deep down, deep down here by the dark water lived old Golem, a small slimy creature. I don't know where he came from, nor who or what he was. He was Golem, as dark as darkness except for two big round pale eyes in his thin face. He had a little boat, and he rowed about quite quietly on the lake, for lake it was, wide and deep and deadly cold. He paddled it with large feet dangling over the side, but never a ripple did he make. Not he. He was looking out of his pale lamp-like eyes for blind fish, which he grabbed with his long fingers as quick as thinking. He liked meat too. Goblin, he thought, good, when he could get it, but he took care they never found him out. He just throttled them from behind, if they ever came down alone anywhere near the edge of the water, while he was prowling about. They very seldom did, for they had a feeling that something unpleasant was lurking down there, down at the very roots of the mountain. They had come on the lake, when they were tunneling down long ago, and they found they could go no further. So there their road ended in that direction, and there was no reason to go that way, unless the great goblin sent them. Sometimes he took a fancy for fish from the lake, and sometimes neither goblin nor fish came back. Actually, Gollum lived on a slimy island of rock in the middle of the lake. He was watching Bilbo now from the distance with his pale eyes like telescopes. Bilbo could not see him, but he was wondering a lot about Bilbo, for he could see that he was no goblin at all. Gollum got into his boat and shot off from the island, while Bilbo was sitting on the brink altogether, flummoxed at the end, and at the flummoxed and at the end of his way and his wits. Suddenly up came Gollum and whispered and hissed. That was the part where I gotta do my Gollum voice, and it's probably not gonna be that good at first, but in time, practice, practice, practice. Bless us and splash us, my precious. I guess it's a choice feast. At last a tasty morsel, it make us Gollum. And when he said Gollum, he made a horrible swallowing noise in his throat. That is how he got his name, though he always called himself my precious. Why, my precious. The hobbit jumped nearly out of his skin when the hiss came in his ears, and he suddenly saw the pale eyes sticking out at him. Who are you? He, who are you? He said, thrusting his dagger in front of him. What is she, my precious? Precious, whispered Gollum, who always spoke to himself through never having anyone else to speak to. This is what he had come to find out, for he was not really very hungry at the moment, only curious. Otherwise he would have grabbed first and whispered afterwards. I am Mr. Bilbo Baggins. I have lost the dwarves and I have lost the wizard, and I don't know where I am, and I don't want to know, if only I can get away. What, what he got in his handsies? Said Gollum, looking at the sword which he did not quite like. A sword, a blade which came out of Gondolin, said Gollum, and became quite polite. Perhaps he sits here and chats with it a bitsy, my precious. It lights riddles, perhaps it does it? He was anxious to appear friendly at any rate for the moment, and until he found out more about the sword and the hobbit, whether he was quite alone really, whether he was good to eat, and whether Gollum was really hungry. Riddles were all he could think of. Asking them and sometimes guessing them had been the only game he had ever played with other funny creatures, sitting in their holes in the long, long ago, before he lost all his friends and was driven away alone, and crept down, down into the dark under the mountains. Very well, said Bilbo, who was anxious to agree, until he found out more about the creature, whether he was quite alone, or whether he was fierce or hungry, and whether he was a friend of the goblins. You ask first, he said, because he had not had time to think of a riddle. So Gollum hissed. What has roots as nobody sees, is taller than trees. Up, up it goes, and yet never grows. Easy, said Bilbo. Mountain, I suppose. Does it guess easy? It must have a competition with us, my precious. If precious asks and it doesn't answer, we eats it, my precious. If it asks us and we don't answer, then we does what it wants, eh? We show it the way out, yes. All right, said Bilbo, not daring to disagree, and nearly burst in his brain to think of riddles that could save him from being eaten. 30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still. That was all he could think of to ask. The idea of eating was rather on his mind. It was rather an old one, too, and Golem knew the answer as well as you do. Chestnuts, chestnuts, he hissed. Teeth, teeth, my precious. But we has only 6. Then he asked his second. Voiceless it cries, wingless flutters, toothless bites, mouthless, mouthless. Half a moment, cried Bilbo, who was still thinking uncomfortably about eating. Fortunately, he had once heard something rather like this before, and getting his wits back, he thought of the answer. Wind, wind, of course, he said, and he was so pleased that he made up one on the spot. This'll puzzle the nasty little underground creature, he thought. An eye in a blue face saw an eye in a green face. That eye is like to this eye, said the first eye, but in low place, not in high place, said Gollum. He had been underground a long time and was forgetting this sort of thing. But just as Bilbo was beginning to hope that the wretch would not be able to answer, Gollum brought up memories of ages and ages and ages before, when he lived with his grandmother in a hole in a bank by a river. My precious, he said. Sun on the daisies, it means. It does. But these ordinary above ground everyday sorts of riddles were tiring for him. Also, they reminded him of days when he had been less lonely and sneaky and nasty, and that put him out of temper. What is more, they made him hungry, so this time he tried something a bit more difficult and more unpleasant. It cannot be seen, cannot be felt, cannot be heard, cannot be smelt. It lies behind stars and under hills, and empty holes it fills. It comes first and follows after, ends life, kills laughter. Unfortunately for Gollum, Bilbo had heard that sort of thing before, and the answer was all round him anyway. Dark, he said, without even scratching his head or putting on his thinking cap. A box without hinges, key or lid, yet golden treasure inside is hid. He asked to day and time until he could think of a really hard one. This, he thought, a dreadfully easy chestnut, though he had not asked it in the usual words. But it proved a nasty poser for Gollum. He hissed to himself, and he did not answer. He whispered and spluttered. After some while, Bilbo became impatient. Well, what is it? He said. The answer's not a kettle boiling over, as you seem to think from the noise you are making. Give us a chance. Let it give us a chance, my precious. Well, said Bilbo after giving him a long chance. What about your guess? But suddenly Gollum remembered thieving from nests long ago, and sitting under the river banks, try, teaching his grandmother to suck. Eggsy, he hissed. Eggsy it is. Then he asked, alive without breath, as cold as death, never thirsty and ever drinking, all in veil, never clinking. He also in this turn thought this was a dreadfully easy one, because he was always thinking of the answer, but he could not remember anything better at the moment. He was so flustered by the egg question. All the same, it was a poser for poor Bilbo. who never had anything to do with the water if he could help it. I imagine you know the answer, of course, or can guess it as easy as winking, since you are sitting comfortably at home and have not the danger of being eaten to disturb your thinking. Bilbo sat and cleared his throat once or twice, but no answer came. After a while, Gollum began to hiss with pleasure to himself. Is it nice, my precious? Is it juicy? Is it scrupulously crunchable? He began to peer at Bilbo out of the darkness. Half a moment, said the hobbit, shivering. I gave you a good long chance just now. It must make haste, said Gollum, beginning to climb out of his boat on to the shore with the bit at Bilbo. But when he put his long, webby foot in the water, a fish jumped out in fright and fell on Bilbo's toes. Ah, he said, it is cold and clammy. And so he guessed. Fish! Fish! He cried. It is fish! Gollum was dreadfully disappointed, but Bilbo asked another riddle as quickly as ever as he could, so that Gollum had to get back into his boat and think. No lanes lay on one lane, no lanes. Wait. No lanes lay on one lane, two lanes sat near on three lanes, four lanes got some. It was not really the right time for this riddle, but Bilbo was in a hurry. Gollum might have had some trouble guessing it if he had asked it at another time. As it was, talking to fish, no lanes was not so very difficult, and after that the rest was easy. Fish on a little table, man at table, sitting on a stool, the cat is the bones. That, of course, is the answer, and Gollum soon gave it. Then he thought the time had come to ask something hard and horrible. This is what he said. This thing all things devours. Birds, beasts, trees, flowers. Gnaws iron, bites steel. Grinds hard stones to meal. Slays king, ruins town, and beats high mountain down. Poor Bilbo sat in the dark thinking of all the horrible names of all the giants and ogres he had ever heard told of in tales, but not one of them had done all these things. He had a he had a feeling that the answer was quite different and that he ought to know it, but he could not think of it. He began to get frightened, and that is bad for thinking. Gollum began to get out of his boat. He flapped into the water and paddled to the bank. Bilbo could see his eyes coming towards him. His tongue seemed to stick in his mouth. He wanted to shout out, Give me more time! Give him time! But all that came out with a sudden squeal was, Time! Time! Bilbo was saved by pure luck. So that, of course, was the answer. Hello, Nikki. How you doing tonight? Saying awesome, thank you. That's that's very nice. If you're saying awesome, thank you for my reading. I thank you for the compliment. I appreciate that. Gollum was disappointed once more, and now he was getting angry and also tired of the game. It had made him very hungry indeed. This time he did not go back to the boat. He sat down in the dark by Bilbo. Love the book choice? Thank you. Yeah. Actually, the people voted for this. It was one of the four books at the time that I was suggesting because I was taking forever reading this book, which I am near the end of. I got two more parts for this book coming out. Um, but I was reading this book because that book was taking so long for me to read. And so now that I'm almost done with this book, it's almost time for us to pick the next book that will be uh, that will be chosen by the four books that I got over here that are on my bed right now. So, but that's for later. This is for now. This is now. sat down in the dark by Bilbo. That made the Hobbit most dreadfully uncomfortable and scattered his wits. It's got to ask us a question, my precious. Yes, yes, yes. Just one more question to guess. Yes, yes, said Gollum. But Bilbo simply could not think of any question with that nasty, wet, cold thing sitting next to him, and pawing and poking him. He scratched himself, he pinched himself. Still he could not think of anything. Ask us, said Gollum. Bilbo pinched himself and slapped himself. He gripped on his little sword. He even felt in his pocket with his other hand. There he found the ring he had picked up in the passage and forgotten about. What have I got in my pocket? He said aloud. He was talking to himself, but Gollum thought it was a riddle, and he was frightfully upset. Not fair! Not fair! He hissed. It isn't fair, my precious. Is it to ask us what it's got in its nasty little pocketses? Bilbo, saying what had happened and had nothing better to ask, stuck to his question. What have I got in my pocket? My pocket, he said louder. Hissed Gollum. It must give us 3 guesses, my precious. 3 guesses! Very well, guess away, said Bilbo. Hensies, said Gollum. Wrong, said Bilbo, who had luckily just taken his hand out again. Guess again, said Gollum, more upset than ever. He thought of all the things he'd kept in his own pockets. Fish bones, goblins' teeth, wet shells, a bit of bat wing, a sharp stone to sharpen its fangs on, and other nasty things. He tried to think what other people kept in their pockets. Knife, he said at last. Wrong, said Bilbo, who had lost his some time ago. Last guess. Now Gollum was in a much worse state than when Bilbo had asked him the 8th question. He hissed and spluttered and rocked himself backwards and forwards and slapped his feet on the floor and wriggled and squirmed. But still he did not dare to waste his last guess. Come on, said Bilbo. I'm waiting. He tried to sound bold and cheerful, but he did not feel at all sure how the game was going to end, whether Gollum guessed right or not. Time's up, he said. String or nothing, shrieked Gollum, which was not quite fair, working in 2 guesses at once. Both wrong, cried Bilbo, very much relieved, and he jumped at once to his feet, put his back to the nearest wall, and held out his little sword. He knew, of course, that the riddle game was sacred and of immense antiquity, and even wicked creatures were afraid to cheat when they played at it. But he felt he could not trust this slimy thing to keep any promise at a pinch. Any excuse would do for him to slide out of it. And after all, that last question had not been a genuine riddle, according to the ancient laws. But at any rate, Gollum did not at once attack him. He could see the sword in Bilbo's hand. He sat still, shivering and whispering. At last Bilbo could wait no longer. Well, he said, what about your promise? I want to go. You must show me the way. Did we say so, precious? Show the nasty little dragons the way out. Yes, yes. But what has it got in its pockets, you say? Not string, precious, but not nothing. Oh no, Gollum! Never you mind, said Bilbo. A promise is a promise. Cross it is, impatient, precious, hissed Gollum. But it must wait. Yes, it must. We can't go up the tunnel so hasty. We must go and get some things first. Yes, things to help us. Well, hurry up, said Bilbo, relieved to think of Gollum going away. He thought he was just making an excuse and did not mean to come back. What was Golem talking about? What useful thing could he keep out on the dark lake? But he was wrong. Golem did mean to come back. He was angry now and hungry, and he was a miserable, wicked creature, and already he had a plan. Not far away was his island, of which Bilbo knew nothing, and there in his hiding place he kept a few wretched old oddments, and one very beautiful thing, very beautiful, very wonderful. He had a ring, a golden ring, a precious ring. My birthday present, he whispered to himself as he had often done in the endless dark days. That's what we wants now. Yes, we wants it. He wanted it because it was a ring of power, and if you slipped that ring on your finger, you were invisible. Only in the full sunlight could you be seen, and then only by your shadow, and that would be shaky and faint. My birthday present. It came to me on my birthday, my precious. So he had always said to himself. But who knows how Gollum came by that present? Ages ago in the old days when such rings were still at large in the world. Perhaps even the master who ruled them could not have said. Gollum used to wear it at first, till it tired him, and then he kept it in a pouch next his skin, till it galed him, till it galled him, and now usually he hid it in the hole in the rock on his island, and was always going back to look at it. And still sometimes he put it on when he could not bear to be parted from it any longer, or when he was very, very hungry and tired of fish. Then he would creep along the dark passages, looking for stray goblins. He might even venture into places where the torches were lit and made his eyes blink and smart, for he would be safe. Oh yes, quite safe. No one would see him, no one would notice him, till he had his fingers on their throat. Only a few hours ago he had worn it, and caught a small goblin imp. Now how it squeaked! He still had a bone or two left to gnaw, but he wanted something softer. Quite safe, yes, he whispered to himself. It won't see us, will it, my precious? No, it won't see us, and its nasty little sword will be useless. Yes, quite. That is what was in his wicked little mind as he slipped suddenly from Bilbo's side and flopped back to his boat and went off into the dark. Bilbo thought he had heard the last of him. Still he waited a while, for he had no idea how to find his way out alone. Suddenly he heard a screech. It sent a shiver down his back. Gollum was cursing and wailing away in the gloom, not very far off by the sound of it. He was on his island, scrabbling here and there, searching and seeking in vain. Where is it? Where is it? Bilbo heard him crying. Lost it is, my precious. Lost, lost! Curse us and crush us, my precious is lost. What's the matter? Bilbo called. What have you lost? It mustn't ask us, shrieked Gollum. Not its business. No, Gollum! It's lost. Gollum, Gollum, Gollum. Well, so am I, cried Bilbo. And I want to get unlost. And I won the game and you promised. So come along. Come and let me out, and then go on with your looking. Utterly miserable as Gollum sounded, Bilbo could not find much pity in his heart, and he had a feeling that anything Gollum wanted so much could hardly be something good. Come along, he shouted. No, not yet, precious, Gollum answered. We must search for it. It's lost, Gollum. But you never guessed my last question, and you promised, said Bilbo. Never guessed, said Gollum. Then suddenly out of the gloom came a sharp hiss. What has it got in its puppet seas? Tell us that. It must tell first. As far as Bilbo knew, there was no particular reason why he should not tell. Golem's mind had jumped to a guess quicker than his. Naturally, for Golem had brooded for ages on this one thing, and he was always afraid of its being stolen. But Bilbo was annoyed at the delay. After all, he had won the game pretty fairly at a horrible risk. Answers were meant to be guessed, not given, he said. But it wasn't a fair question, said Gollum. Not a riddle, precious, no. Oh well, if it's a matter of ordinary questions, Bilbo replied, then I asked one first. What have you lost? Tell me that. What has it got in its pocket seas? The sound came hissing louder and sharper, and as he looked towards it, to his alarm, Bilbo now saw two small points of light peering at him. As suspicion grew in Gollum's mind, the light of his eyes burned with a pale flame. What have you lost? Bilbo persisted. But now the light in Gollum's eyes had become a green fire, and it was coming swiftly nearer. Gollum was in his boat again, paddling wildly back to the dark shore, and such a rage of loss and suspicion was in his heart that no sword had any more terror for him. Bilbo could not guess what had maddened the wretched creature, but he saw that all was up, and that Gollum meant to murder him at any rate. Just in time he turned and ran blindly back up the dark passage, down which he had come, keeping close to the wall and feeling it with his left hand. What has it got in its pocket seas? He heard the hiss loud behind him, and the splashes Gollum licked from his boat. What have I wonder? He said to himself, as he panted and stumbled along. He put his left hand in his pocket. The ring felt very cold as it quietly slipped onto his groping forefinger. The hiss was close behind him. He turned now and saw Gollum's eyes like small green lamps coming up the slope. Terrified, he tried to run faster, but suddenly he struck his toes on a snag on the floor and fell flat with his little sword under him. In a moment, Gollum was on him. But before Bilbo could do anything, recover his breath, pick himself up, or wave his sword, Gollum passed by, taking no notice of him, cursing and whispering as he ran. What could it mean? Gollum could see in the dark. Bilbo could see the light of his eyes palely shining even from behind. Painfully he got up and sheathed his sword, which was now glowing faintly again. Then, very cautiously, he followed. There seemed nothing else to do. It was no good crawling back down to Gollum's water. Perhaps if he followed him, Gollum might lead him to some way of escape without meaning to. Curse it! Curse it! Curse it! hissed Gollum. Curse the Baggins! It's gone! What has it got in its pocket seas? Oh, we guess, my precious. He's found it, yes, he must have. My birthday present. Bilbo pricked up his ears. He was at last beginning to guess himself. He hurried a little, getting as close as he dared behind Gollum, who was still going quickly, not looking back, but turning his head from side to side, as Bilbo could see from the faint glimmer on the walls. My birthday present! Curse it! How did we lose it, my precious? Yes, that's it. When we came this way last. When we twisted that nasty young squeaker. That's it. Curse it! It slipped from us after all these ages and ages. It's gone! Gone! Oh, man, that was kind of hurting my throat a little. That was hurting my voice a bit. Good night and thanks for the pages. You're welcome, Nikki, and have a good rest of your night as well. Also, thank you guys for the 10 likes. I appreciate that. Suddenly, Golem sat down and began to weep, a whistling and gurgling sound horrible to listen to. Bilbo halted and flattened himself against the wall tunnel. After a while, Golem stopped weeping and began to talk. He seemed to be having an argument with himself. It's no good going back there to search, no. We doesn't remember all the places we visited, and it's no use. The Baggins has got it in its pocketsies. The nasty noser has found it, we says. We guesses, precious, only guesses. We can't know till we find the nasty creature and squeezes it. But it doesn't know what the present can do, does it? It'll just keep it in its pocketses. It doesn't know and it can't go far. It's lost itself, the nasty nosy thing. It doesn't know the way out, it said so. It said so, yes, but it's tricksy. It doesn't say what it means. It doesn't say what it's got in its pocketses. It knows. It knows the way in. It must know a way out, yes. It's off to the back door. To the back door, that's it. The goblins will catch it then. It cannot get out that way, precious. Scum! Goblinsies. Yes, but if it's got the present, our precious present, then goblinsies will get it. Gollum! They'll find it. They'll find out what it does. We shan't ever be safe again, never. Gollum! One of the goblinsies will put it on, and then no one will see him. He'll be there, but not seen. Not even our clever eyesies will notice him. And he'll come creepsy and tricksy and catch us. Gollum! Then let's stop talking, precious, and make haste. If the Baggins has gone that way, we must go quick and see. Go! Not far now. Make haste! With a spring, Gollum got up and started shambling off at a great pace. Bilbo hurried after him, still cautiously, though his chief fear now was of tripping on another snag and falling with a noise. His head was in a whirl of hope and wonder. It seemed that the ring he had was a magic ring. It made you invisible. He had heard of such things, of course, in old tales, but it was hard to believe that he really had found one, by accident. Still, there it was. Gollum with his bright eyes had passed him by, only a yard to one side. On they went, Gollum flip-flapping ahead, hissing and cursing, Bilbo behind going as softly as a hobbit can. Soon they came to places where, as Bilbo had noticed on the way down, side passages opened, this way and that. Gollum began at once to count them. One left, yes. One right, yes. Two right, yes, yes. Two left, yes, yes. And so on and on. As the count grew, he slowed down and he began to get shaky and weepy, for he was leaving the water further and further behind, and he was getting afraid. Goblins might be about, and he had lost his ring. At last he stopped by a low opening on their left as they went up. 7 right, yes. 6 left, yes, he whispered. This is the way to the back door, yes. Here's the passage! He peered in and shrank back. But we doesn't go in, precious. No, we doesn't. Goblins is down there. Lots of goblins is. We smells them. What shall we do? Curse them and crush them? We must wait here, precious. Wait a bit and see. So they came to a dead stop. Gollum had brought Bilbo to the way out after all, but Bilbo could not get in. There was Gollum sitting humped right upright in the opening, and his eyes gleamed cold in his head as he swayed it from side to side between his knees. Bilbo crept away from the wall more quietly than a mouse, but Gollum stiffened at once and sniffed, and his eyes went green. He hissed softly but menacingly. He could not see the hobbit, but now he was on the alert, and he had other senses that the darkness had sharpened, hearing and smell. He seemed to be crouched right down with his flat hands splayed on the floor, and his head thrust out, nose almost to the stone. Though he was only a black shadow in the gleam of his own eyes, Bilbo could see or feel that he was tense as a bow as a bowstring gathered for a spring. Hello, Yusef. How are you doing tonight? Bilbo almost stopped breathing and went stiff himself. He was desperate. He must get away, out of this horrible darkness, while he had any strength left. He must fight. He must stab the foul thing, put its eyes out, kill it. It meant to kill him. No, not a fair fight. He was invisible now. Gollum had no sword. Gollum had not actually threatened to kill him or tried to yet. And he was miserable, alone, lost. A sudden understanding, a pity mixed with horror, welled up in Bilbo's heart. A glimpse of endless unmarked days without light or hope of betterment. Hard stones, cold fish, sneaking and sneaking and whispering. All these thoughts passed in a flash of a second. He trembled, and then quite suddenly in another flash, as if lifted by a new strength and resolve, he leaped. No great leap for a man, but a leap in the dark. Straight over Gollum's head he jumped 7 feet forward and 3 in the air. Indeed, had he known it, he only just missed cracking his skull on the low arch of the passage. Gollum threw himself backwards and grabbed as the hobbit flew over him, but too late. His hand snapped on thin air, and Bilbo, falling fair on his sturdy feet, sped off down the next tunnel. He did not turn to see what Gollum was doing. There was a hissing and cursing almost at his heels at first, then it stopped. All at once there came a blood-curdling shriek, filled with hatred and despair. Gollum was defeated. He dared go no further. He had lost his prey, and lost, too, the only thing he had ever cared for, his precious. The cry brought Bilbo's heart to his mouth, but still he held on. Now faint as an echo, but menacing, the voice came behind. Thief! 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 Baggins! We hates it! We hates it! We hates it forever! Then there was a silence, but that too seemed menacing to Bilbo. If goblins are so near that he smelt them, he thought, then they'll have heard this shrieking and cursing. Careful now, for this way will lead you to worse things. The passage was low and roughly made. It was not too difficult for the hobbit, except when, in spite of all care, he stubbed his poor toes again, several times on nasty jagged stones in the floor. A bit low for goblins, at least for the big ones, thought Bilbo, not knowing that even the big ones, the orcs of the mountains, go along at a great speed, stooping low with their hands almost on the ground. Soon the passage that had been sloping down began to go up again, and after a while it climbed steeply. That slowed Bilbo down. But at last the slope stopped, the passage turned a corner and dipped down again, and there at the bottom of a short incline he saw, filtering round another corner, a glimpse of light. Not red light as of fire or lantern, but a pale out-of-doors sort of light. Then Bilbo began to run. Something as fast as his legs would carry him He turned the last corner and came suddenly right into an open space where the light, after all that time in the dark, seemed dazzlingly bright. Really, it was only a leak of sunshine in through a doorway, where a great door, a stone door, was left standing open. Bilbo blinked, and then suddenly he saw the goblins. Goblins in full armor with drawn swords sitting just inside the door, and watching it with wide eyes, and watching the passage that led to it. They were aroused, alert, ready for anything. They saw him sooner than he saw them. Yes, they saw him, whether it was an accident or a last trick of the ring before it took a new master. It was not on his finger. With yells of delight, the goblins rushed upon him. A pang of fear and loss, like an echo of Gollum's misery, smote Bilbo, and forgetting even to draw his sword, he struck his hands into his pockets, and there was the ring still, in his left pocket, and it slipped on his finger. The goblins stopped short. They could not see a sign of him. He had vanished. They yelled twice, as loud as before, but not so delightedly. "Where is it?" they cried. "Go back up the passage," some shouted. "This way," some yelled. "That way," others yelled. "Look out for the door," bellowed the captain. Whistles blew, armor clashed, swords rattled, goblins cursed and swore and ran hither and thither, falling over one another and getting very angry. There was a terrible outcry, to do, and disturbance. Bilbo was dreadfully frightened, but he had the sense to understand what had happened and to sneak behind a big barrel which held drink for the goblin guards, and so get out of the way and avoid being bumped into, trampled to death, or caught by feel. "I must get to the door. I must get to the door," he kept on saying to himself, but it was a long time before he ventured to try. There was a little there was there then it was like a horrible game of blind man's buff. The place was full of goblins running about, and the poor little hobbit dodged this way and that, was knocked over by a goblin who could not make out what he had bumped into, scrambled away on all fours, slipped between the legs of the captain just in time, got up and ran for the door. It was still ajar, but a goblin had pushed it nearly to. Bilbo struggled, but he could not move it. He tried to squeeze through the crack. He squeezed, and he stuck. It was awful. His buttons had got wedged on the edge of the door and the doorpost. He could see outside into the open air. There were a few steps running down into a narrow valley between tall mountains. The sun came out from behind a cloud and shone bright on the outside of the door, but he could not get through. Suddenly, one of the goblins inside shouted, "There's a shadow by the door! Something is outside!" Bilbo's heart jumped into his mouth. He gave a terrific squirm. Buttons burst off in all directions. He was through, with a torn coat and waistcoat, leaping down the steps like a goat, while bewildered goblins were still picking up his nice brass buttons on the doorstep. Of course they soon came down after him, hooting hallooing, and hunting among the trees. But they don't like the sun. It makes their legs wobble and their heads giddy. They could not find Bilbo with the ring on, slipping in and out of the shadow of the trees, running quick and quiet, and keeping out of the sun. So soon they went back, rumbling and cursing, to guard the door. Bilbo had escaped. Oh, there it is. I was wondering where my bookmark was. And I think that's actually a very good stopping point when you think about it. So Bilbo has escaped not just the goblins, but Gollum as well. Will we see Gollum again? Maybe, maybe not. This is basically me blindly reading the story, but because it has been a while since I last read it all the way through. But we'll find out soon enough. In any event, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this reading stream. The next time I will be doing I'll be doing the penultimate part, the penultimate episode of Stephen King's Night Shift. Although I'm not quite sure how to do this, like I don't know how I want to do this because we got the next two stories are pretty short, so I might do all four stories. We shall see. But for the moment, at least for the time being, the plan is to do two stories and then finish the other two after reading two chapters of this book in a separate stream for that matter. But because of how close we are to finishing Night Shift, I'll go ahead and make a poll for the four books to be chosen that I have going on here. But either way, that's then. This is now. I want to thank, like I said, I want to thank you guys so much for watching this reading stream. Hope you guys enjoyed me reading The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, at least chapters 4 and 5. As soon as I get the book done, all the parts of the book will be, um, they will be put on a playlist as well as Night Shift. But for right now, hope you guys have a good rest of your night. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is Forrest Walpole signing off.